In its latest round of sanctions, America hit Russia's biggest oil companies, Rosneft and Lukoil, effectively targeting nearly 15% of global oil supply. But this time, the blow didn't land where Washington expected. Instead of isolating Moscow, it's isolating the dollar. For over a decade, Washington has used sanctions and the dollar's access as its tools of control, freezing nations' reserves, blocking banks from SWIFT, and restricting oil payments in dollars so that countries bend. But every time the US used financial pressure, another nation learned to survive without the dollar. And once those systems were built, they never disappeared. After Russia was banned from SWIFT and had $300 billion in reserves frozen in 2022, nearly 80% of its oil exports today are traded outside the US currency, settled in yuan, rupees, and dirhams. Sanctions are not new to America. The story began with Iran in 2012 when it was fully locked out of dollar settlements. Tehran turned to gold with Turkey and later to yuan and rupee trade with Asia. The blueprint for bypassing the petrodollar was born then. By March 2025 this year, the Central Bank of Iran reported $67 billion in oil exports, its highest in a decade, achieved without using the dollar. Later in 2017, Venezuela faced the same playbook: sanctions, isolation, exclusion from dollar markets. Caracas responded by selling oil in Chinese yuan and even experimenting with crypto-based settlements. By September 2025, Venezuela's oil exports averaged 1.09 million barrels per day, the highest in 5 years, according to PDVSA, their state-owned oil company. Another sanctioned nation rebuilt outside the dollar's orbit. In 2022, the US and Europe froze $300 billion of Russian reserves and cut its banks from SWIFT, the international payment network. It wasn't a small amount. That figure nearly equaled 1/5 of Russia's annual GDP. But the signal was clear. Your wealth is safe only if you obey the system. And the irony of that system is simple. Nations lend their hard-earned dollars, earned through exports, back to Washington by buying US government bonds, only to see those reserves frozen when their politics don't align with America's interests. What was meant to cripple Russia instead crippled global faith in the dollar. Crude that once flowed to Europe now moves to China, India, and the UAE, settled in yuan, rupees, and dirhams, not dollars. By 2025, more than 80% of Russia's oil exports run through these new corridors. And because Russia is the world's second largest oil exporter, that shift alone dragged the dollar's share of global oil trade down from nearly 90% in 2022 to around 55% in 2025. A collapse never seen before in modern finance. The BRICS Plus bloc, now including Russia, China, India, Saudi, Iran, and the UAE, controls more than half of the world's oil production and consumption and represents over 45% of global GDP in purchasing power terms. Meanwhile, the G7 bloc that froze Russia's reserves retains about 30% of global GDP and produces roughly 20% of global oil. The shift is clear and permanent. These nations aren't just trading energy, they are rebuilding the financial rails underneath. BRICS Pay, a decentralized digital payment platform bypassing SWIFT. BRICS Token, a future gold-backed digital currency in ideation. Project mBridge, a cross-border digital currency platform linking China, UAE, Hong Kong, and Thailand. SIPS, China's expanding alternative to SWIFT. What began as sanction resistance is now deliberate design, a slow but steady dismantling of the petrodollar network, where trade is settled in regional currencies, digital tokens, and real commodities, not in US Treasury debt. For the first time since Bretton Woods, the center of global trade finance is shifting, and America stands outside watching. Tariffs and sanctions were meant to project strength. Instead, they created inflation, Inflation forced rate hikes. Rate hikes expanded debt. Debt weakened confidence, and nations diversified away from the dollar. Each turn of the wheel spun faster, a cycle of control turning into decline. The US now holds $38 trillion in debt, spending over $1.2 trillion a year on interest, more than its defense budget. What took a century now happens in months. It took 101 years for America to reach its first $1 trillion in debt, and only 124 days to add the last trillion in 2025, while its debt to GDP ratio surged to 120%. For 50 years, oil kept the dollar at the center of the world, but by weaponizing that very system, Washington forced the world to find another path. The petrodollar isn't dying from competition, it's dying from consequence. The dollar's share of global foreign reserves has fallen from nearly 70% before 2008 to just 57% today, its lowest level in modern history, as central banks quietly replace paper trust with tangible value. In 1945, power spoke through the flash of a bomb over Hiroshima. In 2022, it spoke through the freezing of a nation's wealth. Different weapons, same message: confirm or be contained. But history moves in spirals. Every act of dominance plants the seed of resistance. From the ashes of Hiroshima rose Japan's economic miracle. From the sanctions on Russia rose a new financial order. The world isn't turning anti-America, it's turning post-America, where no single power decides whose wealth exists and whose doesn't. And perhaps that's how balance is restored, not through confrontation, but through evolution. Power is moving from west to east and towards the new global south, from control to cooperation. Oil, once a symbol of dominance, is now the fuel for global balance. This is MarketVelugu, Light on Markets.